Drupalize.Me.
Let's kick things off with a quick overview of a presentation of the basics of jQuery. This presentation will cover the bare minimum that you need to know in order to get started using jQuery with Drupal. We also have another DVD in the Lullabot Learning Series called An Introduction to jQuery that covers each of these concepts more in depth. Let's get started. First of all, what is jQuery? jQuery itself stands for JavaScript Query, which we'll see where the query comes into things later in this presentation. It's a JavaScript library, smaller than most images on the page. Compressed, it's only about 23K, more or less depending on which version of jQuery you're actually using. Overall, though, it significantly reduces the amount of code that you need to write. As a developer, writing JavaScript code can actually be really tedious and rather confusing, and jQuery simplifies all of it, making it so that all of your code works across all different browsers, which is the next benefit. Any code that you write in jQuery, you can pretty much rest assured that it will work across all browsers and all platforms without any additional changes. Lastly, jQuery provides a set of visual effects that can add a wow factor to your site, such as fading in or sliding up and down. Let's take a look at some jQuery syntaxes. First of all, jQuery only contains one function in the entire library, the $sign function. And the $sign function can do multiple things depending on the arguments that you pass into it. The first thing, and the most common thing that you'll be doing with the $sign function, is doing selectors. Selectors allow you to find elements on the page so that then you can operate on them. If you pass in HTML into the $sign function, it will automatically create DOM objects that you can then place onto the page wherever you like. And lastly, the $sign also provides a set of detection scripts that allow you to determine which version or browser you're currently working with. And even though this isn't really necessary within jQuery most of the time, you can now use the $sign function to check information about the browser. In later versions of jQuery, we're now no longer using the browser property, though it's still available. Instead, we're checking the support. This support object will tell you information about the browser, such as whether or not it properly renders the box model or supports opacity, making it so that you can fine-tune your scripts to provide a good experience for all users. So, let's talk a little bit about jQuery selectors. jQuery selectors allow you to find an element on the page so that you can operate on it. Selectors are one of the main reasons why the jQuery library became so popular to begin with. First of all, you can pretty much use any of your existing knowledge about CSS and reapply it to jQuery. So for example, you can find an element by class simply by using a dot in front of the name of the class, just like in CSS. You can also use the hash symbol, just like CSS, to find an element by its ID. Or if you want to, you can even select multiple elements by separating them with a comma. You can even use advanced CSS selectors as provided by the CSS3 specification. Even if the user's browser doesn't yet support CSS3, jQuery provides the functionality to make it so that you can use CSS3 advanced selectors across all browsers. In this particular example, we've made it so that we can select an element by its attribute. So for example, this particular selector will find all text fields on a page by checking its attribute type is equal to text. You can even do more advanced selectors, such as this attribute selector, that will find all images on the page that end with a ping. So basically, finding all ping images on the page. It's important to note that this attribute selector is probably one of the biggest differences in the jQuery API between older versions and the newer ones. The first version of jQuery ever included in Drupal was in Drupal 5, and it was jQuery 1.0.4. Later versions of Drupal then included newer versions of jQuery. Drupal 6 included jQuery 1.2, and newer versions of jQuery can be added to Drupal core by using the jQuery update module. Drupal 7 includes the latest release, as of now, of jQuery, jQuery 1.4. So just keep in mind that if you're using older versions of jQuery, you'll need to include this @ sign in your attribute selectors. All newer versions of jQuery, that @ sign can now be omitted. So, once you've found an element on the page using a jQuery selector, you'll likely want to do something with it. Most commonly, you'll apply an effect to that element that you have selected. jQuery provides a set of effects, the most common of which, or basic of which, is called hide, and its complement show. This will simply immediately take an element that is visible on the page and hide it immediately. Interestingly though, the hide effect, though being the most simple effect that jQuery provides, is also one of the most extravagant. If you add a parameter to the hide method, then it will in fact make an effect that's pretty exciting. This is the way it looks. Taking an element and slowly hiding it. We'll collapse it to the left and to the top and fade it out at the same time. Besides just using slow and its complement fast, you can also pass in a particular integer. If you pass in an integer value, jQuery will interpret that as the number of milliseconds that effect will take to complete. So for example, 3000 would take 3 seconds to complete a particular event. So, besides just hide and show, you can also use some effects such as fade out. And fade out will simply fade out the element. It also has a complement fade in. And this is the way that these effects look. Lastly, besides hide, show, fade out, and fade in, there's also slide up and its complement slide down. And this is the way that this effect looks. And that's a general summary of the effects that are available within jQuery. Besides these effects, there's also some very useful toggle commands that you can use that do the opposite, whether or not an element is shown or hidden. So for example, if an element is currently slid up and hidden, then you can use slide toggle and it will slide down. If it's already down, then it will slide the complement back up. There's also some great effects that you can use by toggling classes. Toggling classes will essentially add or remove a class based on whether or not that element currently has it. So for example, you could toggle a class such as hover to make it so that an element is hovered when the mouse is over it, and then remove the class hover when the mouse is moved back out. Class manipulations are great because they make it so that you can apply all of the powers of CSS simply by toggling on or off a particular class. One of jQuery's greatest features is its ability to chain together separate requests. It's also where the word query comes into the word jQuery. So for example, let's take an h1 element, which we've selected here on the first line of this code, and then we've prepended the word hello, and then appended an exclamation mark, making it so that the word hello now surrounds this h1 with an exclamation mark at the end. And then we can fade it out and fade it in. Each one of these actions will take place in sequence, so that first the prepend will happen, then the append, then the fade out, then the fade in. And you can chain together these commands endlessly, all of these effects actually taking place on the original element that was selected. Chainability was a great innovation introduced in the jQuery library. So, once you've found an element on the page, and once you're able to actually do some effects on it, you'll probably want those effects to actually take place based on a user action. These 3 steps put together the basics of just about all jQuery scripts. So a jQuery event allows you to actually trigger this action in response to the user clicking, or hovering, or doing some other action on the page. These are the most common events used within jQuery. So click obviously makes an element react to a user clicking. Change is responds to any change within a select list or radio button or checkbox. Toggle is very similar to click, only it will execute these actions alternatingly. Hover, very similarly, will respond to rolling the mouse over something and then rolling it back out. Each one of these events all take a function name as their arguments. This function name is what will actually be executed when the user does this particular action, whether clicking or changing a form element or hovering the mouse over a particular item. Besides adding events, you can also remove events that you've previously bound by using the unbind method. So that does it for basic coverage of the jQuery concepts. First of all, there's only one function within the jQuery library, the $sign function. With this $sign function, most commonly, you'll be selecting an element on the page using a selector. Once you've found that element, you'll apply an effect to it. Together, selectors and effects aren't that much use unless you're actually doing them in response to a user's action on the page, for which we use jQuery's events. And lastly, all of jQuery's abilities are completely chainable, making it so you can put together a long sequence of events simply by concatenating them all on top of the same selector. So this covers the fundamentals of the jQuery library. We'll be doing some more hands-on examples throughout this video, but for a more in-depth coverage of all of these features within the jQuery library, check out the Lullabot Learning Series DVD and Introduction to jQuery. Let's go write some code.